You're listening to the Ministry Grow Show, brought to you by Reliant Creative, the creative agency for gospel-centered ministries. Find out more at reliantcreative.org.
Welcome to the Ministry Grow Show, a podcast dedicated to helping churches and ministries grow and make more effective impacts for the kingdom of God in an ever-changing digital world. Whether you're building and growing a gospel-centered ministry or leading a church, if you want insight into the strategies, struggles, challenges, and successes of other ministry leaders, you've come to the right place. Welcome back to the Ministry Growth Show. Today on the show, I'm talking with Nick and Laura Armstrong. They are co-founders of Glocal Community Partners. Nick and Laura, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Can you guys tell us a little bit about your ministry, Glocal Community Partners, and maybe share why you exist and what do you guys do?
Sure. Yeah. Glocal is a ministry that essentially we work very closely with resettlement agencies that are resettling refugees into Boise and the surrounding areas. And the main thing that we do is to just mobilize the church, volunteers, as well as to disciple and train those volunteers and then connect the volunteers with refugee families through a variety of different programs. And I think probably the centerpiece of those programs is friendship teams that allow for friendships between certain groups. Could be Bible study, a family with a refugee family, and just doing life together, having tea together, being able to just develop a relationship and friendships through that. But then we have a lot of other programs. Probably Laura will go into those as we go along in this interview. So that's really what we're set up to do, and that's what Glocal's about.
So how'd you guys get started in this?
Well, yeah, we were. Oh, I'm going to let Laura answer that. You can edit that out.
Jump right in.
I'm looking at him going, no. So Nick and I had spent 23 years in Indonesia, and we had worked as overseas workers there. I was at a school, an international school, and Nick was doing relief and development with a Christian agency. And it was just getting to that point where we knew that God was calling us back to the States. And so our daughter actually was here at Boise State and had done some student learning volunteering with World Relief, who used to be here, was a resettlement agency here in Boise. And so she was the one that really said to us, why don't you work with people who've come as refugees here in Boise? And so that little nugget from her is what got us thinking about doing a ministry here that was different than what the resettlement agencies do, because we didn't want to become a resettlement agency. And so we saw a couple of different organizations. One was in the Chicago area and one was in Tucson, where they really were trying to fill in gaps that the agencies aren't able to do, that they don't have the bandwidth. And a lot of that is the friendship part of just building relationships. And so that's how Glocal was designed. And we started out under a local church here in Boise, but in the last year and a half became our own nonprofit. And now we're a standalone organization ministry.
Cool. So you guys saw a need that some of those larger resettlement agencies weren't able to serve, probably just because of their size and scope of work that they were focused on, and saw an opportunity to serve that need.
Yeah, I think really that relational part, that the agencies have a list of things that they have to get done with the clients, with the people who've come in. And so a lot of times they just don't have that time to build social capital and to build those relationships. And so being an organization, an agent, or a ministry that's able to do those connecting has just been really key for a lot of families that come in, just to give them that extra relational touch that they wouldn't have otherwise.
So as you've grown the organization and built and developed it, what are some of the challenges and struggles you guys have come up against because there's always ever-present challenges and struggles as you grow a ministry, right?
I think, yeah, probably bandwidth and just, at times feeling overwhelmed by how much there is to do and how many people are not getting any extra connections. So at times, yeah, recruiting volunteers to be a friendship team for a
Mm,
family at times has been difficult depending on what's going on around. So I would say, yeah, just a lot of times just really busy bandwidth. I don't know. What else would you say would be some of this?
Yeah, I think, also the numbers are continually going up on a global level. There's over
Hmm.
103 million people that are considered forcibly displaced. 33 million of those are refugees. And so we, the United States is a resettlement country, and maybe I'll explain a little bit more about that later, but just the idea that those that are coming into the United States are, there's just a great need for, helping them to get resettled into a new situation where they find safety and
mm,
refuge here in the United States. And so trying to do that in a way that just accommodates those that have come into Boise, and uh, getting them connected with people can be a challenge. In some ways, there's cross-cultural differences, and
Hmm.
mhm,
there's those things that some people
Trauma.
are somewhat fearful, in terms of stepping into a situation where there's a lot of unknown. And so I think some of it just has to do with helping people understand that the people who've come are people who have families, they have children, they have a lot of the same, aspirations for their families
Hmm.
to flourish and their kids to get educated, that sort of a thing. But there's this unknown that it's hard to bridge that gap. And so, I think that's a lot of what Glocal is trying to do, is to just educate the church and say,
Hmm.
this is part of who we are as a church. It's foundational to following Jesus, and hey, let's see what we can do to step into the situation rather than stepping back.
yeah. I imagine it would be difficult in this space, but how does foreign policy, politics, and border policy play a role in support you guys get from the local church, especially in a
Yeah.
conservative state like Idaho, who like that side of the aisle tends to be a little less, uh, maybe we'll just say friendly in that space.
Right, right. So yeah, I would say, how we view immigrants, the sojourner, the stranger, is largely going to determine how we view immigration policy and border policy and that sort of a thing. And so, I think one of the things that we have to be reminded of as a church is that we need to, as followers of Jesus, we need to be really shaped by the life and the teachings of Jesus, and really what the entirety of the Bible says about welcoming the stranger. And the Hebrew
Hmm.
scriptures, uses a term for sojourner or immigrant that's ger, used 92 times in the context of the care and welcome of stranger. And so that, it's very important part of who we are as followers of Jesus, to be informed by that rather than allowing for partisan politics, and that sort of a thing to shape
Mm,
our view on immigration and border policy. So our immigration and border policy should be shaped really by, the Bible, as well as Jesus' life and teachings. And so I'm, that's part of the challenge, but it's also, it helps us to understand what kind of what's going on, and why sometimes
hmm
the church, you know, it isn't embracing this rather than,
right.
stepping back.
Do you find that it's difficult to get churches on board with supporting what you guys are doing because of that? because of some of those views?
Yeah. What did
No,
you?
I just would say, I mean, I think Nick probably can flesh this out more, but I think it just depends on the church and the church body. We work with a lot of churches, but we work with a lot of individuals from churches. And so
Mm,
we've seen where maybe they come from a church that may not be open to it, but they themselves really see and have a burden and a vision for that. So I
oh,
don't know what
cool.
else you want to
Yeah.
add to that.
Yeah, and I would say it's a mixed bag in terms. Some churches shy away, and some churches have really embraced us. So, I think it's like Laura said, there are volunteers that come forward that perhaps their church hasn't really dealt with refugees before, or they haven't
Mm-hmm.
really thought through it, but they themselves really feel a calling to get involved. And so, most of our support and encouragement and prayer and financial support has really come through those individuals. Although we do have some churches supporting
Yeah.
us as well. So,
Hmm,
yeah, it's been a mixed bag in that regard.
that's cool. Now, you guys have touched on it a little bit, this relational aspect that is so central to the ministry. What are some of the end goals or the purpose behind connecting volunteers and churches to refugees in the area? Is it disciple making? Is it needs based service? Like, what does that kind of look like?
Yeah, I would say, it really is centered around disciple making. We'd love to see the local church embrace the part of following Christ that welcomes and cares for the stranger, and really realize that these are people who have not wanted to flee their homes. They didn't choose to come to, a place to find refuge. They would much rather be where they were in their homes in a safe
Mm-hmm.
environment. But the fact is that through certain events of persecution and that sort of thing, they've made their way here, and God has brought them to our
Mm-hmm.
doorstep right here in Boise. And so there's a real opportunity for the church to come alongside them and care for them and love them and build relationship. And to do that, I really think, for one, to help mobilize people, there has to be a sense of Jesus calling for them, and there's also a need to understand the people that are coming, and what it means to work cross culturally, especially with people who've come with trauma and a lot of different suffering and pain that we can't understand, from just being here in Boise. So so discipleship is a big part of, I think, how we teach and kind of encourage this welcoming and walking alongside refugees. So yeah, and then I think the other part is that connection piece where we're really trying to help bridge that gap to take the first step and to get involved with refugee families through a variety of different programs that we have.
Mm.
Yeah.
So with that focus, what are some of the important lessons you guys have learned along the way that might give guidance to other ministry leaders or maybe churches that are interested in learning more or don't know how to step into this need?
Right. Well, I think one is like what we've said is the gospel. The gospel can be best understood in relationships and friendships, and so the love of Jesus is best expressed when we walk alongside people, take time to listen to them, and really come to understand their struggles and their dreams. What we've found is that most people who've come as refugees, their dreams are really oriented around their children. Some of them have lost hope themselves for their own futures, but they see a future in their kids, and so that's really a largely the focus of what they want for their life here in the United States is a life for their children. But I
Mm,
think, one of the things that we've learned is that people are people wherever you go in
Mm-hmm.
the world, that we have far more in common than
Mm-hmm.
what we realize. And we discover that in relationship. And
yeah.
so, yeah, I think we also discover that even though we may step into this thinking we're going to minister to someone we find that our own lives are enriched just as much, if not more, than what we can offer others. So,
And I think too, it gives a, as you work with people who've gone through so much, um, I think it really helps shape your own perspective on your own life and just how privileged we are here. Even through, it's not been the easiest in the States. I think we've all had a hard time with the pandemic and just different things going on, but it's always relative to what somebody else is going through. And I
Yeah.
think as you walk with someone who's lost family members, who have been torn from their own home and the comfort of what they had, it really helps shape and give you a perspective on the world, and that God is at work, and that we can there's just a lot to be done and a lot for us to sorry, I'm kind of losing my train of thought. Cut that part out. Anyways, yeah, I think it's just perspective, understanding
Right.
different parts of the world, having a more global mentality and not just a North America, US mentality, I think is another really big thing that you gain and learn
yeah.
from interacting with people.
I think, yeah, I just add, Zach, that I think one of the problems that happens is that people conflate different terms with regard to immigration. And immigration is a big umbrella term, for people who are moving to another country. But forcibly displaced people are really a small subset of that overall immigration picture on a global scale. And
Right.
yeah, so the idea where people conflate refugee, with other types of immigrants becomes, I think, important to kind of make that distinction. Even within forcibly displaced people, there's quite a difference between someone who is a refugee and someone who is seeking asylum,
Oh,
and
interesting.
someone who's come as a humanitarian parolee, for example. So, like a refugee forced from their home, they flee to a second country. Like someone from Syria needing to flee into another country would go to Turkey, and in Turkey they would get their refugee status from the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, and it would be years, if not decades, before they would actually be able to be resettled into a third country, such as the United States. And there's 30 different resettlement countries, primarily in North America as Europe, but only less than 1% of all the refugees in the world get resettled. And those coming to the United States is a far less percentage than that. And so it's really on par with really winning the lottery, for someone
Wow.
to be here in the United States as a refugee, that there's an incredible amount of thanks, generally, just for someone who's here and realizing that so many other people that wanted to be able to resettle in a third country could not do that. So yeah, I just say that because refugees, would go through this very long, lengthy, sometimes 3 to 5 years of vetting process in order to be able to come to the United States. And so that's a lot of people don't realize that it's quite a process to get here. And so that program has been very successful in terms of how they vetted refugees. It's the most successful and the most stringent vetting process of any other category of entrant into the United States. So
Interesting.
so people, yeah, I think it helps people to understand just what they've gone through and that journey that they've taken to get here.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, you guys obviously have this like central uh, focus, like it's part of your DNA that relationship is so key. I can hear
Absolutely.
that in what you've already shared. How does your work with refugees from, say, Indonesia, where you guys spent so much time, um, or any other country, it doesn't matter, in this area of connection affect relationships with people and communities back in their home country? Do you find that those relationships that you've developed here in the Boise area have gospel implications and access back to the home country where the people you're serving are from?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes, and I'll let Laura respond from her perspective. From my perspective in Indonesia, I worked with internally displaced people primarily because of natural disasters and earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanoes and floods and the like. And so I was dealing with people who had gone through a great deal of loss and pain. Many lost family members and that sort of a thing. And so, I think that the takeaway from that work is that uh, you see people first before you see a victim. You begin to see them as, as image bearers of God, people with untold capacities and untold gifts, as opposed to seeing them as people who lack things and people who are victims. And so, of course, we need to be able to see the trauma, the pain, the suffering. That needs to be profoundly recognized, but it should not be what defines them. And so, we really, as seeing people as image bearers of God, we see a connection to them as people, and then are able to develop relationships within that context. And then we begin to really understand who they are just by taking the time to listen, taking the time to understand, and just continuing to come back to this importance of building relationship. It's really, I think that relationship is foundational part of people participating in their own recovery. That they're the ones that are driving their recovery, their own development into the future. And we are just merely coming alongside and walking with them in that process. But when we begin to see people in that light rather than as victims and people who lack things, then we begin to really, I think those friendships become that, critical part of, as Laura mentioned, adding to their social capital and really seeing that they and their communities have the capacity for recovery and for healing.
I think one of the things, kind of taking a different slant on it, is the idea of just seeing families here that then are talking to their families back in their home country, just about what they've received here, who's walked alongside them. Our work a lot of times is primarily with Muslims. Most of the groups, or the people groups that we've kind of had a drawing towards, have been from Muslim countries. I think because we worked in Indonesia for so long and we're very used to working with Muslims. So in that sense, that's had a really profound impact. We did have an opportunity, and we've heard different stories of people that have gotten to travel to Jordan and meet members of families that they know here whose family members are in Jordan or Turkey or other countries that maybe we can travel to, but they can't yet. And so we've gotten to meet family members overseas of family members here, which has been, that's just such an amazing touch. Nick got to meet the brother of a good friend of ours here, and I got to meet the mother of a friend here, and just being able to exchange that greeting from their relative here, and exchange gifts for them, carry things for them, I think has been really profound, and something that can be such a huge blessing to those families that are still waiting to be resettled back overseas.
Yeah. That's cool. That's awesome. Well, hey, let's take a moment to hear from today's sponsor, but when we come back, we will continue our discussion with Nick and Laura Armstrong. Are you looking to grow your ministry but don't have the money or marketing knowledge to make that happen? There's good news. Google offers an advertising grant to churches and ministries that is worth $10,000 per month. This means that if your ministry is a 501c3 nonprofit, you are eligible to receive $120,000 per year in free advertising dollars. This allows you to place ads at the top of Google search results pages and drive thousands of visitors to your ministry website every month. Our sponsor, Click Nonprofit, helps your ministry acquire this Google ad grant and then manages your Google ads to ensure you get the most out of the grant. Schedule a free consultation at clicknonprofit.com to learn more about how this grant can help your specific ministry. Mention the Ministry Growth Show when you sign up to get 20% off your first 3 months of management. All right, welcome back to the Ministry Growth Show. We've been talking with Nick and Laura Armstrong about their ministry, Glocal Community Partners. As we get back into it, guys, how are you working discipleship and disciple making into your programs and what you guys do? We've talked a little bit about it, but let's dive deeper into what that looks like.
So I don't think you'll be surprised that I'll say relationship. But, I think everything that we do is just built around the idea that you're building a relationship that is honest, a relationship that is, a mutuality in the relationship. And so discipleship really is just that idea of walking alongside one another, just being the hands and feet of Jesus. And so I think it's not necessarily sitting down, opening your Bible and that kind of thing, just because of the people that we're working with. It's a sensitive group. Oh, go ahead.
No.
And so I think we want to be careful. We want to be respectful. And I think that's the kind of thing that we are also discipling our volunteers in how to walk alongside people, especially people who are Muslim and people who've come as refugees. One of the things that we do is a training, and it's a 2-hour training, and it's for anybody that's going to volunteer with us. But a lot of times we just even have people who want to understand and learn more. And so in some ways that's a form of discipleship, because the training encompasses everything from the numbers, like the Refugee 101, to working cross-culturally. How do you help somebody to become self-sufficient? And then looking at trauma. And so
in biblical
with a strong basis of why as Christians why do we welcome the stranger? And so, I see that as also a big part of the discipleship that happens with Glocal, is to the church and to the people who are like seeking to understand better what does it mean to welcome.
Yeah, I'd say one other thing and this is especially what Laura has been involved with, is the discipleship of people who are actually going to connect in those friendship teams that we mentioned, and helping them to, kind of take that first step forward, and not to overcome their fear, but to also have a trauma-informed approach to people, so that they're not trying to, bring up stories of trauma or to re-trigger things that are just not a good part of a healing process, but one that's sensitive to the people they're with. And just walking alongside teams that are willing to connect with other refugee families is just an important part of that discipleship as well.
And I want to go back to that idea of mutuality. So today was our Christmas party with the women that we teach English to. And we have women from about 4 or 5 different countries. And again, the majority of them come from Muslim countries. And we don't shy away from sharing about the Christmas story. We tell them the Christmas story. But we do it with a sensitivity and an understanding that, in the United States, Christmas isn't just a Christian holiday anymore. There's a community way, a non-religious way of celebrate, pluralistic, and so we try to share both. But then it's with I'm not shoving my religion down your throat. I'm exposing, I'm letting you know about what Christmas means to us as Christians. And we hope that you will share back with us things that are important for you so that there's dialogue. I think that's the biggest thing, is that we always want to be able to share and listen and be mutual and, just be
Respectful.
present and respectful with those who we're walking alongside.
Yeah. Nick, you talked about the trauma informed care and making sure that you are taking care of being respectful of some of the things that some of these people have walked through, some of the experiences that they've had. What does that look like when you start communicating the stories of how God is moving through your ministry to your partners? And by partners, I mean, I would classify that as people who are financially invested in the organization or is at some level of volunteer work. How are you communicating to them while staying respectful to those that you're serving, and making sure that, like, storytelling is significant, it's important, but we also want to make sure that we're not exploiting story at the expense of or detriment of those that we're trying to serve, right? And so, do you guys find that balance is difficult, and how have you found balance in that?
Do you want me to? I would say that's something that we really wrestle with a lot. I think, at times, if we're going to tell a story, if needed, we'll change the name or just not use names. We're really super, super careful about posting photos on social media or anywhere without their permission. I a lot of times just have to promise, if I take a picture, that I will not post this, especially for women and for people that are coming from countries where they're fleeing because of persecution, or whether it's persecution for their faith, or like many of the Afghans, they left with their lives intact, but are very worried about their families at home. And so I love that what you guys do is trying to help people to be able to share their stories. And I'd love to learn more from you. But I would say that is something that I find, that balance to me is always really hard, because I want to honor the privacy of the people in our friendships, and never would want them to feel like I was exploiting what's happened to them in order to benefit our ministry or whatever. And so, I would say that's been something I've wrestled with, and I don't have any great answers.
And it's difficult, right? Like you said, that these are situations that are difficult. Oftentimes there's trauma involved. You're coming out of these people are coming out of situations that we can't even imagine here in the States in most cases. And so what to help you in this area, I would just say, it's okay that sometimes we don't tell these stories. I think that there's this pressure on ministries and this is coming from a storyteller, right? This is my passion. There's this pressure that we have to always tell a story. And sometimes these stories aren't complete. Sometimes these stories are in process, right? People are still going through these things. Christ is still in the midst of this season of their life. And the story isn't ready to be told, right? Because it doesn't have an end. A story has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And if we're telling stories of people who are in the middle of that story, that's where I think sometimes it can get dangerous, because that story is not complete. It's not come to full fruition. And so we need to be able to take care and recognize. I think that's why, that's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about training in storytelling structures and being able to recognize where the story is in process, right? If I can look at somebody's story and recognize from an outsider looking in really quickly that, oh, they're in the midst of this and they have not come to the end. They've not come to the other side of the story. like that's not even a story I'm going to try to bring up to tell,
Yeah.
because it's not ready to be told. And
Yeah.
so that's why I think it's important for especially ministry leaders and ministry marketing directors to be able to at least recognize story and story structure and see how stories are playing out, because oftentimes in the ministry world, we're telling stories that aren't ready to be told,
Yeah.
and that can do more damage
Yeah.
to those we're trying to serve than otherwise. And so
That's
just to give you permission that sometimes it's okay not to, like it's
yeah.
okay.
Thank you.
You don't
I
have
appreciate
to.
that.
That is such
And so
good advice. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
that's very helpful. I would say that there, in the case of those who've come from Afghanistan, there's another layer of complexity and danger. The people who come from Afghanistan have primarily come under this legal apparatus called humanitarian parolee, and
Okay.
they've been granted that because of their connection to the U.S. government, the U.S. military. And
Mm,
so any sort of a word that hints to the Taliban of who this person is could endanger friends and family and that sort of
yeah.
thing. That right now they're in a situation where much of their family are still having to move around in order to avoid being,
Yeah.
detected by the Taliban. And so there's a
Wow.
lot of trauma still going on. Like you said, it's a story in process, and they're still going through that trauma. And so we really need to be sensitive to that story and sensitive to where they're at.
So these might have been people who were like a translator for our military over
Yeah.
there, and now
Yeah, and
they've
so
been granted some type of leave to come here in safety because of the support and investment they put into our military, like that kind of situation.
and as you remember, back last year in September, not this
August.
or August in 2021, it was a very chaotic exit. And
Right.
so there were people who not only were doing things within offices, but you had military units that were set up to work alongside. There were fighter pilots and all sorts of things that were doing
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of operations that were highly dangerous and highly visible to the Taliban. And so that especially those people, if their families were ever uh, you know detected by the Taliban, they would be in real danger.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. We have a whole course on our site dedicated to the ethics of storytelling
Oh,
and
cool.
the ways in which we can say one of these stories had uh, a cool and hopeful end, like there was some type of cool Christ transformation in somebody's life that we wanted to testify to. Um, there's there's a way. There's always ways in which we can testify of what God has done
Mm.
without putting people in danger, without
Yeah.
putting
Yeah.
lives at stake
Yeah.
and at risk. Uh, Always seeking to protect identities and not give away faces and
Yeah.
not give away voices. Like voices, the sound of
Mhm.
somebody's voice can give somebody's identity away. And so
Yeah.
there's ways in which we can do those things that allow us to tell the story, like you said, using pseudonyms and other techniques that allow us to tell the story, that allow us to give God glory for what he's done in that person's life
Mhm.
without
Mhm.
putting them at risk. And so like we're always trying to help ministries find that balance of, all right, how do we give God glory in the testimony of what he's done, and at the same time protect these people who are willing to share their story, because those things both can happen at the same time.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of ways that in which we can do that. But yeah, that's interesting.
Mhm.
It's always a struggle, right? Like
Yeah.
that's a hard
Yeah.
tightrope to walk. There's challenges at every turn, um, and so yeah, you guys, it seems like you guys are making sure to. I'd rather ministries default to the side of not storytelling than the side of exploiting story
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
putting
Absolutely.
people in danger
We're right
Yeah.
there
always.
with you.
Yeah.
Right.
Right there
So
with you.
yeah. Um, So how have you guys, what are some of the things that you guys have done to keep supporters engaged and excited about what the ministry, what's up with the ministry?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I'm hoping to really focus on this next year as we've
Mm,
grown. We've kind of worn a lot of different hats. And so I've been doing program stuff, and Nick's been doing a lot of financial, and we've been able to hire some people to do more of the
oh,
programs. So
cool.
that's kind of, I'm hoping to dive into like, how can we, share more about what is going on at Glocal. And I mean,
Mm,
we've done just mainly the normal things of newsletters, and we do have social media. We had a great first open house this last September that really
mm,
got to highlight what Glocal is doing, and I think that was really special. It was an interesting thing, just even talking about this. How do you highlight the debate of, do you have families that we've walked alongside? Do you have them at the open house, or do they feel like they're being kind of
mm.
exploited, or look at this person that we've helped.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, it just, it invades every part of what we're trying to do, because you want to say, these are wonderful, amazing people, but you also don't want them to feel like, well, guy, I have to be here because they helped me, kind of thing. And
Right.
Mm.
so, it is, I know the importance of it, and I, yeah, continue to just learn and find that balance of
Mm,
helping people catch a vision for it.
Yeah,
yeah.
and I was thinking of, another thing that I think a lot of churches in the valley don't recognize is that there were three resettlement agencies in Boise, and the Christian resettlement agency, World Relief, had to close its doors in 2017 because of the numbers of refugees that were coming into Boise went way, way down. And that reality, I think, really helped us to realize that we're still an agency that's Christian. We love Jesus, we follow Jesus, and so we're an agency that is working with refugees that churches can turn to say,
Mm,
if we want to get involved with those who've come as refugees, here's an agency that we can look to and support. And so
Mhm.
we're hoping to get that message out more, I think, in the next years as well.
yeah. Mm,
So
that's cool.
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and just to, we had, it's been a while since they were on, but we had the co-founders of Exile International on our show
Mm,
years ago. Have you guys ever heard of them?
Mm-mm,
no.
mm-mm.
So they do work. Um, uh, they do a lot of like trauma care for
Oh,
children
cool.
who have experienced, who've been involved in like the, um, what's that called? Like the child warfare stuff. Like they've
Oh
been
Oh,
in
right.
Africa.
wow.
And so these
Yeah.
kids, a lot of these kids have had unimaginable trauma that they've
Oh, yeah.
experienced. And through God's redemptive work in their life, through the work that Exile International is doing, um, there's incredible stories of life transformation in these kids'
Mm,
hearts.
Mm,
mm-hmm,
And one of the things that we always encourage ministries to do when we're talking about story is, first and foremost, we have to make sure that we're getting permission from the people that we're, from the stories that we're the people of the stories that we're telling.
mhm.
So if you're gonna invite somebody whose work you've worked with and served, to some type of event where you're gonna put their story essentially up on a pedestal for all to
Yeah.
see, like, we need their permission first and foremost. And if we don't
absolutely.
have it, like, it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm,
And but when what we talked about this a little bit with Exile International, what they've experienced is when they go to these kids and say, hey, we're kind of thinking we'd like to tell your story, but we want to know if you would be willing to share your story in the first place. Like, they always, for permission is number one.
mm-hmm.
In most cases, like, I think they quoted 90% of cases, these kids are so excited that somebody wants to share
Mm,
their story,
mhm,
and they're so
mhm.
excited to testify of what God has done in their heart and in their life, that they like are overwhelmed with joy that they get to share
Yeah.
that and testify
Yeah.
of what he's
Mm-hmm,
done.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I talked about this in one of my previous episodes earlier today. And we talk about it in a lot of our coursework. But there's this guy named Dr. Kurt Thompson, who is a Christian psychologist and has done a lot of research on the power of storytelling and the process of sharing one story and the process of somebody hearing somebody else's story. Like in that interaction, there is physical healing that takes place in both the storyteller and the person hearing the story. And so there's opportunity to enter into some of this the trauma that people have experienced. And by the testimony of what God has done in their life, there can be healing in that process. And so, man, there's so many cool opportunities to, isn't it like our God that when we bring him glory, when we testify of what he's done, there's physical benefit. Like not that that's the point of it, but there's always something additional that he's just like, here, I'm just going to sprinkle you with this because I'm so good. Right. And so,
and it's interesting that we were at a conference where a psychologist was talking just about people who've experienced trauma, PTSD, that even the relationship, having a strong relationship, somebody who is a listener, somebody that's going to be consistent in your life, that's another physical healing that happens.
Right.
Like we've seen what can happen in the brain. And so that's a lot of what motivates us too, is just God is so amazing that he does bring healing, and it can be through storytelling. It can be just through that friendship, that consistent relationship, sense of safety and all those kind of things. So,
Well, and even in that relationship, like in relationship, that's how we interact and communicate with one another is through sharing stories. And so I think that in the ministry space, we tend to consolidate storytelling to, that's for the marketing space. But you could be telling stories within these relational groups that you guys are building, having people share stories with one another and have that be a significant part of your ministry without ever sharing a story to the public eye. And it still is a way of using storytelling for the benefit of those people that you've served, for the benefit of your volunteers, for the benefit of your staff. And it doesn't have to be tied to your marketing and all of those metrics. Like there's ways in which we can use this powerful tool that we've all been called to. Like we see it all throughout Scripture. And it doesn't have, like, I think we just obsess over and focus too much on what this is going to do for my marketing. Like, let's take a step back and see how much wider this medium can be applied and see that there's all kinds of areas where we can use it for the benefit of our ministry.
So that's great.
And how God can work in the heart of man through that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, guys, this has been a really fun conversation. I've enjoyed having you guys on. If people want to learn more, if there's church leaders out there that are listening, if they want to learn more about what you're doing and they want to get involved, how can they get a hold of you?
Probably the best, easiest way is to go to our website. So www.glocalboise.org. So Glocal, GLOCAL.
Okay.
Boise, no dot in between. I think, and then there's a web
.org,
.org, but there's a link to contact us, and that's probably the easiest way to get a hold of us.
Yeah, we'll make sure to put that in the show notes so that people can get access to that. Can I pray for you guys in the ministry?
Thanks.
Yeah. Father, I just lift up the Armstrongs and ask that you would bless them and their ministry, that you would go before them, continue to go before them, and just guide and lead, and just that they would experience your love through this process, Father. I think that it's easy for us ministry leaders to get so tied down and caught up in the to-do and the running and the chasing after our to-do list that we get bogged down and forget that we get to be a part of what you're doing, that we're walking with you through this. But first and foremost, you want an intimate and close relationship with us. And so I pray that they would just experience your love as they are walking in obedience to this call you've placed on their heart. I thank you so much for Nick and Laura and this opportunity to have this conversation, to learn about what they're doing, to learn about what you are doing through this ministry. I pray that you would just bless them, bless the ministry, and continue to work in the lives of people who've been displaced, Lord. We know that your heart is interested in caring for people who have the sojourner, who've been displaced out of their home. And so you've done that for all of us. And we just thank you that we get to be a part of this redemptive work, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Zach.
Yeah, thank you guys. And we appreciate you being on the show, and we'll be in touch, okay?
Sounds great.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Ministry Grow Show. If you enjoyed it, we'd appreciate it if you rate and or review us on the iTunes store. And make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you have a story to share with other ministry directors and pastors, or know someone who would be an incredible guest on the Ministry Grow Show, let us know. We love connecting with ministry executives and sharing their wisdom and insight with our audience. Just send us an email at info@reliantcreative.org. And lastly, if you need help telling your ministry story, we would love to share how we can help in that process. Check out Reliant Creative at reliantcreative.org. See you next time.